to your virtual tour and tasting here at Chief's Own Distillery. I'm Stuart McIntosh and I'm co-founder, owner and distiller. Today we're going to go through the core range of 45% whiskies we make. That is the 900 Standard, the 900 Pure Malt and the 900 Sweet Peat. But we'll also take you for a little bit of a tour around the distillery and explain some of the reason and logic and business case behind the distillery. So whether you bought the LockDown pack, which will only be available for a short period we hope, that's 3 50ml samples, or you bought the gift pack with 3 200ml, or you've gone the full Monty and you've got 700ml of each of those whiskies, we'll talk you through the making of it, the taste profile, and so on. While we're down here on the distilling floor, it's worth talking through some of the elements and components of the distilling system. So this is a 4,000 litre electrically fired pot still. You traditionally fire a still with a coil, so a steam coil, which gets to about 100 degrees. Our elements, we have 24 5,000 watt elements, and they get much, much hotter, so about 240 degrees, and that helps to create some of the profile of our spirit. So some of those early toffee and caramel notes, as we heat the whiskey wash, it essentially cooks the residual yeast and barley, and that gives us that expression. 4,000 litres, it's about 4.7 metres tall from the platform to the highest point. We've designed the whole distilling system to create very big, bold expression whiskies. So you can see whilst we have reflux, it's a bit easier for the spirit to rise up through the swan neck. The line arm, the cross bit, is downward facing, so we're helping getting those oils and congeners into the condenser and then recondensed. So if you want to get ready for the tasting, if you bought one of the lock-in packs, you'll have one of these little numbers. That's got the tasting notes, and on the back it's got a few little secrets about the distillery. If you have either the 3-pack or the bottles, you can download that from our website. So what will you need? The tasting mat, because they're numbered 1, 2, 3. You'll need 3 glasses, or we think so. And you might want to have some water. And whether you do or don't have a pipette, that's quite useful. What we like to do is pour our whiskies first. So you won't have a pourer, but you don't need to have the whole 50 mils if you've got the small one. I've just poured myself 15 mils. I'm going to let that breathe for a second while I tell you a bit more of the story. And then we'll launch into the first one. All right, so that is done now. So not always pretty, but here are the 24 elements inside the still. And the process of distilling is really chemically, it's separating chemical components by their vaporizing temperatures. So alcohol has a much lower vaporizing point than water, so we're able to simmer the alcohol off. So the alcohol rises as a vapor. It's forced to touch coal copper, which cools it down and refines it, so only the finer spirit gets to the top. It's then, once it's reached and done its hard work, we have a downward facing line arm, which means we can get more of the fats and oils and congeners across into the condenser. Now the condenser is pretty cool. So the top, you'll see there's a sleeve on the top, there's also one on the bottom, and we force cold water under high pressure into the bottom. And then there are 61 of these 3/4 inch tubes that go up through the middle of the condenser. So we're able to push cold water from the bottom all the way to the top. And then we have plates. So the plates force the gases to essentially go past all those cold pipes. And the result is we recondense it. We then be able to see the distillate coming out through that sight glass. And then we decide what to do with it. So in the far tank, we have the big tank at the back is the low wine receiver. The front right tank there is the fours and faints tank. And here is the spirit receiver. And over there is the waste tank. So once we've extracted the alcohol, we then choose what we do with it. So on the initial low wine run, it goes to the far tank, the low wine tank. And on a spirit run, we then come in through this little gadget here, which is our spirit safe. So the spirit follows the line, comes through underneath, and then we choose what to do with it. So that valve's open, but when it's closed, all the spirit rises up through this pipe here. So we're then able to continually test it, and we can taste and interact with the spirit. We can make the fine cuts we have to from heads to hearts to faints. And then the spirit goes down that hole. Pretty simple design. This is always obviously covered whilst we're distilling. And if we throw the right hand lever, it goes to the fours and faints. If we throw the left hand lever, it goes to the spirit receiver. It's a very manual system. So there's 71 valves through this place. So you have to know which valve to have open and which to have closed. So I've come over here to our spirit receiver. You can see in here it's been a double batch, so we have about 1,400 litres of new make whiskey at 73% alcohol. So perfectly clear spirit, but it's immense in aromas. You've got your esters and you can smell the barley. It's a beautiful spirit. But we then dilute this back to 63.5%, which we then go into the barrels with. So these are the barrels. Obviously we filled them in 2018, some of these ones. These are our 3 recipes you're going to try. The top one there is the 900 standard. The third whiskey you'll have is the sweet peat, and the third whiskey down here is the pure malt. So these are all French oak ex-Apra or sherry barrels. This is what one of them looks like inside. So all of our barrels, so all the teal ring is wine oak, so that's our Cooper we've had right from the beginning. And he provides all the barrels, apart from the American oak ones. But this is quite a good stave, so a barrel that we've pulled apart. This has had one life as a red wine barrel, then second life as a Apra barrel, or Pira. And you can see there the sugar line, just near my thumb. There, that's how deep the sherry has penetrated into the barrel. And then Andrew heavily charged the barrel for us, and then the whiskey goes in. So that clear spirit, when whiskies are 3 to 4 years old, depending on when they're ready. The initial format that we went with were these guys. So they're 100 litre barrels. I think we have about 400 of those. But we're moving away now to the larger format barrels. Up here we've got the barriques, but we're also moving to hogsheads, which are 300 litres. And part of that is because our window to get the whiskey out is very, very tight. Because A, it's French oak, B, small format, C, it's very hot, cold climate. So we mature whiskey incredibly quickly. So the window I'm talking about is between the whiskey being ready and the whiskey being over oaked. And that's an issue we have here if we're not careful. So let's get on with our very first whiskey. Now 900 standard is our flagship. 900 being the reference to when our surname was awarded to us. But probably 95% of the whiskey we make here is 900 standard. Sometimes we then finish it in cask expressions or single casks. But this guy is a very historic whiskey, and that was the concept here, was to create a whiskey that used to be made and generally isn't made much anymore, partly because it's very expensive to make. So instead of using a distiller's malt, which is kilned at a very low temperature and preserving a lot of sugar for alcohol yield, we actually use a beer malt, so a mid-range pale beer malt as our prime ingredient. So that doesn't get us high yield, it gets us a lot of flavour, a lot of biscuits and a lot of that malty characteristic to it. We use peat, so we actually do our best of breed, so we buy a small quantity of beds heavily peated, so a Highland peat. So it doesn't have that medicinal quality, that sort of salt iodine. This is more flowers and floral kind of soft smoke. So this is our flagship. This is historic. This is big, bold whiskey. We bottle all these 3 are at 45%, which we find is the smoothest point or roundest point in the whiskey, but it also allows you to dial it back if you like, if it's either too strong or too bitey, or you just want a different experience. We'll talk about that when we get to the sweet peat. So let's get into it. So the nose on this, I mean, straight away, it's a big old whiskey, straight away. We've got deep colour, the viscosity is just ridiculous, the legs just don't run down. But on the nose, guess I'm getting Grandma's Christmas pudding, not the cake, but the pudding, that wet kind of sensation. I'm also getting like a fruit compote, more like a berry compote or baked stone fruits, dark stone fruits. It's warm, a little bit of toffee and sort of caramel I can smell in it. Oh, that's nice. So I'm getting a lot of those characteristics. I'm getting almost a dark toffee and sort of. The reason why we put the peat in it is not to give it smoke. You'll note in the back palate, like even now, I'm still tasting a bit of smoke. But when we mix the peat or combine the peat into the French oak sherry barrels, we're getting this longer palate and there's more toffees and caramels than it is the smoke. So it's a big oily whiskey. I can feel it's just sitting here beautifully. It's not hot. But it's such a complex taste. I mean, I'm tasting toffees, I'm tasting chocolate, almost like a rum and raisins kind of experience. But I think the thing that will probably impress you too is the length of the palate on this whiskey. So this is 3.5 to 4 years old, probably 4 years old. And it's just, you know, to me, it's quite a compelling, complex whiskey. So while we're here, so how did this start? So on your sheet, you'll have the 25 words, but if we go back to 2011, there was a whiskey competition. And that was, first of all, you registered and they sent you out a small sample bottle of a more expensive whiskey. So that was lovely. The long story cut very short is I bought 3 bottles, of which 2 I had to register to my father. And during that process, there's a little competition on there as well. So a second component, and that was 25 words or less of why you should go to Distillery in Scotland. So I bought the whiskey, the 25 words that my father wrote won the trip. So he wrote, my grandparents passed the love of whiskey through my parents to me, and I want to make sure my children pass it to their children. So pretty cool words, considering this whole brand is about intergenerational and that sort of connection of whiskey. So you'll see those words painted on the wall, and it's sort of an initial or a foundation statement behind the distillery. So when we got back, then we started a formal test bed. So I guess it wasn't a normal trip we had to Scotland. It was a father-son trip, which was amazing, but we had access that most people can't. So we got to see a lot of the science behind it. We got to see the maltings, we got to see the cooperages, and it kind of made a bit of sense. So when we got back, we started making whiskey. So luckily Naomi has a science background, and that helped to rectify a lot of the problems and flavour issues we were having. Our efficiencies were terrible, and by the time we applied a lot of science to it, clearly it worked. So after that, Naomi and I made the decision that we would go from the 40 litre to the 4,000 litre commercial operation. It took us a year really to design the system, and then we had it built and installed. So we've been distilling now for about 5 years. A long journey in any whiskey to get to market. We always get asked why Chief's Son Distillery. So I'm Stuart McIntosh, and that at the top there is McIntosh in Scottish Gaelic, and it says Vic un Taoiseach. So in the early 1100s, so 900 years ago, our family were awarded that as a battle honour by the Chief of Alba, or the King of Scotland at the time, which is contentious to say. But it says Vic un Taoiseach, or Son of the Chief. So when we name the distillery, we simply flipped it around to be Chief's Son Distillery. So the second whiskey we have here is our pure malt, a 900 pure malt. The aim with this one was to create a whiskey that tastes like malted barley. So there's a lot of science goes into this particular whiskey. So we changed 2 key components. The first is we changed the recipe. So we dropped out the malt, the peated malt, and we now use a Vienna malt, which is nearly a crystal malt. So it adds a lot of complex, deep flavours to it, something you'd have in a stout beer. But we also changed the second thing, and that is the process. So normally we obviously use fours and feints to get consistency and yield. With this one, it's called pure malt because the way we distill it, we get our 8,000 or 12,000 litres of pure malt whiskey wash. We strip it down to 30%, and then we refine it by itself, so no fours and feints. So this is a very clean whiskey. its purpose tastes like malted barley. So if you have a little smell of this, it almost smells like a condensed pale beer, but with a lot of lollies in it. I'm getting malt, I'm getting biscuit, I'm getting a strong nose, and it's very floral almost. So once again, even though it has less of the oils from the faints, we're still getting long legs representing a big whiskey. So let's have a little try of this one. It's incredibly different. It's a different, I mean, people ask us about region. What region do you kind of represent? We don't. We make 3 completely different base spirits that are all unique in their own right. So this one has such clarity to it. I'm getting the top of the creme brulee. I'm getting almost like white peaches have been reduced down, but I'm getting a lot of biscuit, sweet biscuits, and a lot of malt out of it. The finish is different. It's not as, it stays, it's a deep whiskey still, but it's not like this that leaves the flavour staying there for a long time. But it's got a balance to it that it's toffees and lollies. It's not too sweet. So this is arguably my favourite whiskey, other than the cask expressions that we finish in imperial stout or porterbarrels, or a combination. It's not a breakfast whiskey, but it is a completely different experience and totally different. So the process of distillation is a double distill. So the first distillation takes the whiskey wash, which is about 7.5% alcohol, which we're able to put 4,000 litres in it. And then we're extracting and concentrating the alcohol. So the first run we do takes the wash from about 7.5% to 30% alcohol, but only a quarter of the volume received in the low wine receiver. We do normally batches of between 8 or 12,000 litres, and once we've stripped everything, we have probably 3,500 litres of low wine, and we also have the fours and faints, so the beginning and the end of the previous run, which contain a lot of good alcohol and a lot of the flavour. We want to maintain consistency through the product, but we also get a lot of efficiency by reusing it. So after we've stripped it, we then go back for the second distillation. We make sure that's below 30% alcohol to make sure we can get a clean separation with methanol, but also oils and fats. And then it takes us 18 hours to run the still. So it's a very long, slow process where we extract the methanol, then we're into the hearts, and then obviously we strip it again. The remainder we strip back to the faints tank. All right, so we quite often get asked about the bird and what's the logo represent. And this came about because our designer, who was amazing, got talking to us about the logo concept and how we'd brand it. And Naomi particularly had said that, you know, she felt the brand was becoming very McIntosh. And whilst she just happened to be married to a McIntosh, it kind of didn't reflect the future and longevity of the brand. So the first thing was Naomi loves birds. So that was what helps to connect Naomi to the brand. It's a white-bellied seagull, which is a predominant bird of prey down here on the Mornington Peninsula, as with other coastal regions. It's designed to look like our still, but with a broad family foundation and bushels of barley. And a Scottish chief historically wore 3 feathers in his bonnet to denote his rank. So that's how we came up with the white-bellied seagull to be our logo. All right, so we have one more whiskey to go through. And this is a favourite of Naomi's. And the aim here, the aim here was malted barley. The aim here was to create a very buttery whiskey that had a soft peat influence in the back of it. And this is where we might use our water. People always say, oh, don't add water, the distiller knows better. Well, kind of am the distiller. And this particular whiskey proves a really good point about whiskey. So we put this at 45 because again, it's that smooth, big whiskey sort of effect. But we'll find when we add a bit of water, it'll open it up and make it sweeter, and it will make it slightly peatier. So this is a variation of the same, but it has a lot more peat fennels in it, or smoke fennels. this, I guess, is the most unique and different whiskey we make. And the process is proprietary, but it's still a double distillation process. But this, you know, it's a beautiful golden colour. The legs incredibly oily because that's part of this whiskey. So we just sit there. The legs don't go anywhere on this one. They just continue to stay up beautifully. On the nose, we're getting, I mean, creme brulee, I know I mentioned here, it's getting the same type of thing. We're getting vanilla beans, you know, but I'm getting a lot of tobacco, like fresh tobacco, not burnt tobacco, obviously. And it's got a little bit of an earthy component to it, but it doesn't have that salty iodine. Again, this is the Highland peat component to it. You know, that incredibly creamy. With this whiskey, we had to be careful not to make it too smooth. We needed to have a little bit of a spirit bite to it, so you'd recognise it as a whiskey. And I get a little tiny bit of that, but it's just incredibly smooth and creamy. You know, I guess it just stays there. It's this soft peat, this really gentle kind of peat to it, and it stays in a nice way. It stays a little bit sideways, a little, you know, it sort of fills your mouth. But this is a really good example here. So I'm only putting a few drops in it. It's not particularly measured. So when you have alcohol above 37% by volume, it actually starts to numb your mouth or retard your flavour. And that's a scientific fact. So as much as we find 45 is a good round point, what I've done now is try and get closer to that. And this whiskey opens up incredibly. So do all of them, but this whiskey in particular, because it's the predominance of the peat starts to shine through. So even from a nose point of view, I'm getting now a lot more smoke and a kind of more toffees than I was getting. I was getting dessert characteristics, and now I'm getting more toffees. And it's a different whiskey. It really is different. It's I've lost that kind of alcohol sharpness, which was good, but now it's a smoother, softer. It's a lot sweeter. I'm actually getting some of the characteristics of the malt are shining through now, but I'm also getting this soft kind of persistent peat to it. And strangely, it gives it more flavour, but it also makes it last longer in this case. I'm just getting now, it just stays in my airway and mouth a lot longer. So from the comfort of your living room, we really hope that you enjoyed the virtual tour of Chiefstone Distillery, the guided tasting, but most importantly, the whiskies. So from the entire team at Chiefstone Distillery, we'd like to thank you for your ongoing support, and we all really look forward to seeing you down at the distillery in the near future. To your health.